All right, welcome. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into the Motor Vehicles Act of 1988. Now, this isn't just some dusty old law. It is the legal DNA that governs every single car, truck, and driver on India's roads. From the moment you think about getting a license to the complex rules around accidents and insurance, this act is the master rulebook we all live by, whether we know it or not. So, here's our game plan. We're going to start with the absolute fundamentals, the definitions that everything else is built on. Then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of licensing, what it really means to own a vehicle in the eyes of the law, and then tackle the tough stuff, accidents and insurance. We'll wrap up by looking at how claims and compensation actually work. This is the whole journey, from getting your license to facing liability. Okay, first things first. Before we can get into the rules of the road, we have to understand the language of the law. Think of it this way. The specific definitions we're about to cover are the essential building blocks. Get these right, and the rest of the act makes a whole lot more sense.
Now, a law this big doesn't just appear out of thin air. It has a history. The story really starts way back in 1855, with an act that first established the right to claim compensation. Fast forward to 1939, and we see key ideas like third-party insurance start to take shape. But by 1988, things had changed dramatically. We had more cars, new technology, and way more traffic. The old laws just couldn't keep up, so we got the comprehensive act we have today.
So what was the big idea behind the 1988 Act? What problems was it trying to solve? Well, for one, it had to wrangle a massive increase in the number of vehicles on the road. It was also about pushing for better technology, setting clear standards for safety and pollution control. But, and this is crucial, it had two other giant goals: to tighten up the whole process of getting a license and, for the first time, to build a real system for tracking down traffic offenders.
Okay, let's get into the weeds with the definitions, starting with the absolute cornerstone of the entire act. What in the world is a motor vehicle? Section 2, subsection 28 gives us the answer, and it's deceptively simple. A mechanically propelled vehicle adapted for use upon roads. That's it. If what you're driving fits that description, boom, the rest of this law applies to you. Next up, who does the law see as the owner? Now, this is super important. It's not necessarily the person who paid for it. Section 2, subsection 30 says the owner is the person whose name is on the registration certificate. And here's the clincher. It also includes someone who's got the vehicle on a hire purchase agreement. Why does this tiny detail matter so much? Because when something goes wrong, legal responsibility, it all comes back to this definition.
This next definition is a bit newer, but it is literally a lifesaver: the golden hour. The law officially defines this as the 1-hour window right after a traumatic injury, where getting proper medical care gives the highest chance of survival. By putting this term right into the act, it sends a powerful message about the absolute urgency of getting help to accident victims fast. All right, so we've defined the vehicle and we know who the owner is. Now let's shift our focus to the person behind the wheel. What are the specific, granular rules you have to follow to legally get on the road? Let's cut right to the chase. Section 3 lays down the most fundamental rule of driving, and it could not be any clearer. No person is allowed to drive a motor vehicle in any public place unless they hold an effective driving license. This is not a guideline. It's not a suggestion. It is an absolute command. No license, no driving. Full stop. Of course, you can't just get a license whenever you feel like it. Section 4 lays out very specific age limits. Think of it in tiers. At 16, you can get on the road, but only with a small vehicle, an engine up to 50 cc. Then, at 18, you unlock the main level. You're eligible for most general motor vehicles. But to drive in the big leagues, a commercial transport vehicle, you have to be at least 21 years old. So how do you actually get one? Well, it's a two-stage process. You don't just walk in and get a license. First, under Section 8, you have to get a learner license. This is your training wheels period, where you learn under supervision. Only after you've done that and passed your tests can you move on to Stage 2, applying for a full-fledged driving license under Section 9. And here's something you've got to remember. These licenses have an expiration date. Your learner's license, it's a short-term deal, valid for only 6 months. A license for a transport vehicle lasts for 3 years before you need a renewal. And if you're transporting hazardous goods, the bar is set even higher. That license is only good for 1 year. Now, just because you have a license doesn't mean you can't lose it. It is a privilege, not a permanent right, and it can be revoked. And the reasons are serious. We're talking if the holder is a habitual criminal, or a drunkard addicted to drugs, or if they use their vehicle to commit a major crime. It can also be taken away for simply being a danger to the public, or, no surprise here, if you lied or cheated to get the license in the first place. Okay, we have covered the driver pretty thoroughly. Now let's switch gears and focus on the machine itself. Because in the eyes of the law, the vehicle has its own legal life, its own story, governed by a strict set of rules about registration, ownership, and permits. Think of registration as the vehicle's official ID card. And just like a driver's license, it is absolutely mandatory. Section 39 makes it clear. Every single vehicle has to be registered. But the law is also practical. I mean, what about when you buy a new car? How do you get it home? That's where Section 43 comes in. It allows a dealer to give you a temporary registration, so you're legally covered on that very first drive. The Act also covers the vehicle's entire life cycle. For instance, Section 50 lays out the exact procedure for transferring ownership when you sell your car. Section 51 has specific rules for vehicles that are still under a financing agreement. And if you plan on using your vehicle for any kind of commercial transport, Section 66 is crystal clear. You absolutely must have a permit. All right, we now need to move into a much more serious part of the Act. This is the part nobody wants to have to use, but everyone needs to understand. What happens when things go wrong? We're talking about accidents and the critical financial safety net the law requires: insurance. So let me ask you a question. You've got your driver's license, your vehicle is registered. What is the one other thing that is absolutely 100% non-negotiable before you can legally drive that vehicle in a public place? The answer is spelled out black and white right here in Section 146. You must have a policy of insurance that covers third-party risk. The language here is ironclad. It says no person shall use a motor vehicle without one. This isn't a suggestion. It's not a nice to have. It is a mandatory protection for every single person on the road. Now, when an accident happens, the law tends to put it into one of two buckets. The first is called no-fault liability. This is when we know which vehicle caused the accident. In this case, the owner of that vehicle has to pay compensation, period. It doesn't matter if they were being negligent or not. Then you have the second bucket, a hit and run. This is when the vehicle that caused the accident just can't be identified, and that triggers a whole different process. And that brings us to the final piece of this legal puzzle, the aftermath. How are claims for compensation actually filed? Who is legally allowed to file them, and who makes the final decision? This is where we get into the legal mechanics of how justice is supposed to be served after an accident. For these specific liability scenarios, the Act actually sets out fixed compensation amounts. So for a death under that no-fault liability we just talked about, the amount is 50,000 rupees. For a permanent disablement, it's 25,000. And in the tragic case of a death from a hit and run, the compensation is also set at 25,000 rupees. So, who actually has the legal standing to file for compensation? The law is very specific about this. Of course, the person who was injured can file. The owner of any property that was damaged can also file. In the event of a death, any or all of the legal representatives of the person who passed away can make a claim. And finally, an authorized agent can file on behalf of any of those people. I want to leave you with this quote from the Patna High Court, which I think really gets to the heart of the matter. It says, "An accident is an event which takes place without one's foresight or expectation, an unforeseen event or overlooked mischief." It's a powerful reminder that this entire incredibly detailed legal framework we've just walked through, it's all an attempt to bring order, accountability, and a measure of justice to some of life's